I have been told by people that they take my opinion and Metroidvania tier list into account when it comes to making purchasing decisions for themselves. And that always strikes me as very strange, because I generally rely on my own opinions I form my own opinions. I don't like relying on anybody else. It is nevertheless also quite flattering. So I thought I'd just do a quick follow-up video to my first impressions of God of War Sons of Sparta. As you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, I'm now just over 10 hours into the game. I've got 31% completion, though that number is starting to rise at a reasonable clip, because I've unlocked quite a few things to go and get. And I have very mixed feelings about the game. Started off quite positive, but the game is being carried reasonably heavily in some ways by the IP. This could realistically be a game about any two boys from Sparta. It doesn't, so far, it doesn't make the blindest bit of difference to me that this is Kratos and Deimos. It doesn't tie to the events of the games that we know and love, realistically, in any real, tangible way. But there are some things that I really like about the game. It's expansive so far. I like the map. And I did, finally, after 7 hours, unlock the ability to pin screenshots to it. So rather than trying to faff around with the, I'm going to be honest, not particularly great, but not terrible map marker system, I can now just pin screenshots. I don't know if there is a limit to the number of screenshots that I can pin, but it was something that should have been unlocked from very close to the start. In fact, as soon as you get the archives ability, which records all the things, I think you should have unlocked the ability to screenshot the map, because it's just a much better system for this particular scale and scope of game. So the map is decent, it's very smooth, it's very performant. It is a grid-based map, so it's got all the kind of finagles that a grid-based map does, but the screenshot function makes it much more workable, much more bearable, and so on and so forth. And it does mark on a lot of things. I like the region report that you can unlock for each region, so that if you want to do the whole completion thing, you can do that. As you can see, I've been working my way through, but there's quite a lot of stuff to go and see and find. And obviously areas that I didn't have the screenshot power for, I now need to go back to screenshot things on the off chance that I won't be able to do the challenges. So I'm kind of not going back to places because there doesn't seem a point yet. I'll just see if I can unlock all the Metroidvania powers first. So I've just got to this side of the map. I don't know whether there's going to be a big area like this over this side, or whether it's going to be smaller, or what. I'm constantly being drip fed the main story, which I appreciate. There's always a marker on the map. So exploration wise, great. Performance wise, not great. I've had slowdown in the wrong places. I've had fairly substantial audio bugs, to the extent that I actually had to quit out and close down the game a couple of times in order to reset the audio. Things were just stuttering and looping and playing out of sync. The music was completely corrupted in places. It was not good. Certainly not for a 25 quid game published by Sony, frankly, with a respectable IP behind it. The graphics are weird. I really like the background pixel art. The backgrounds remind me of the best bits and pieces of games like Blasphemous and Blasphemous 2 especially, and Guns of Fury to an extent. The character stuff, it's alright, but it does give me a vibe of these were 3D models which have been pixelized. And it's a little bit weirdly uncanny at times. So they don't quite work for me. They're not bad, but the background art is better. So the areas have been visually distinctive. The map is decent. The things that you can find seem to be fairly worthwhile. You know, we've found materials, we found spear tips, we found charms, we found different powers. You know, it's very Metroidvania-y. It's very Metroidvania-y, but it is also very kind of God of War-esque in the way it does its... you know, you can change your spear tip, and then you can upgrade the spear tip, and so on and so forth. There is a skill tree, which... in my opinion, has been quite lackluster. And this ties into, unfortunately, the thing that is bringing the game down the most for me, which is the combat. The combat in the game is not great. They've set up this combat with a parry system and thrusts and so on and so forth, but the most they have been doing to challenge me as a player is just throwing swarms of enemies at me. And in certain games, that wouldn't bother me. You know, games where you can just cut through things. But our damage has been fairly low consistently so far. I've just upgraded again, so I'm feeling a little bit stronger now. It does that thing that the more recent God of Wars do, where the enemy level is gauged according to your strength. So enemies that were level 3 previously are now strength 2. Or if they were 2 before, they're now 1, and so on and so forth. So I think that's what it's doing. Anyway, but it's been throwing quite a lot of enemies at me at once, which means that parry timings and stuff are just press and hope. And worst of all, realistically, is the fact that we have got contact damage, we have got a dodge roll that is inconsistent in combat in terms of if it wants to work or not. And we get staggered. We get hit stunned, I think is the better way of saying it. You know how in a fighting game or in a Souls game, you know, you get that kind of feeling of impact. It works on us. So we're constantly getting this feeling of staggering. So if we're being surrounded by multiple enemies, we just kind of get stagger locked, and it's like, can you hit the dodge button or the parry button in just the right frame, essentially, to get yourself out of it, because otherwise you're going to be kind of stun locked to get to death. Add to it the fact that the healing system, I mean, I've got a healing flask now, but it's a hold up, and the meter in the top left hand corner, the little flask meter, you know, empties whilst your health bar fills up at a kind of a 1-to-1 ratio. It's all right, but it's quite slow, and it's not massively useful actually in combat. It kind of feels more like a tool to use between combat. In combat, you have to rely on using the R1 plus triangle, no, not R1 plus square attack to get the enemies to release health orbs, and they're not enough. But I have finally unlocked a belt charm, which improves the potency of health orbs, and I've had to upgrade that a couple of times in order for it to be useful. So it's not great, but it's getting there. So we've got a reasonably robust set of equipment options. It just like in the 2016, whichever it was, for God of War and then God of War Ragnarok. It's very much styled after that. But even now, with the emblem of life at level 3, it doesn't feel like the health orbs that you get in combat are really making a huge difference. Some other things that it does in combat, and in fact in the game as a whole, that I'm not a massive fan of. If you go into the game options, and you'll see here that I've changed the difficulty of the game down to the basic one, because I'm finding the combat so dull that I've just thought, you know what, I'm just going to turn the difficulty down. There's no difficulty based achievements. The combat just isn't interesting or robust enough to really excite, coming off the back of Katama and Academy Citadel with its big, weighty, crunchy combat, to something like Mio, which was great exploration and okayish combat, to this, I would argue that in some ways this feels less fluid than Mio, even though realistically there are more combat options than Mio. It just feels a little bit turgid. Why was it that I went into the menu? This was it. Skipping cinematic sequences. Now you'd think, skipping cinematic sequences would give you the option of skipping things that you've seen before, yeah? No. That is, weirdly enough, not what it does. So, I fought a boss up in this area here. He was in fact, I think, this room here, was it? Something like that? Can't remember. And before attempting the boss, there were 7 or 8 lines of dialogue back and forth between Kratos and his brother, and then it transitioned to the boss. And you had to watch that every single time, because you can't skip that sequence, that cinematic sequence of dialogue. Likewise, I fought a boss up, I think it was in this area here. Boss comes down. You can't skip any of it. It shows you it each time. What you can skip is the random conversations that you have with your brother at the camp. You can skip through dialogue that way, but where you actually probably want to skip through stuff, i.e. at the start of boss fights, if you lose and you have to do it over and over again. I mean, I fought this guy probably 7 or 8 times. If not more than that. I can't remember. I haven't checked back on my footage. It's like, the one things that I actually want to skip, it won't let me skip. But it'll let me skip other stuff. So, in terms of options, cinematic skip actually doesn't do what I want. And I'm going to turn it off, because I have almost accidentally skipped some dialogue that I was actually interested in reading, because, as I said, the story of the game is doing some reasonably heavy lifting. It does interrupt you quite a lot, not to the exposition heavy extent that Gestalt, Steam and Cinder does it, where it interrupts you and gives you a 60-second plus cutscene, like constantly, but, Kratos stops and Deimos shows up and they have a quick back and forth, and then you carry on quite a lot, and it does interrupt the pacing and the flow of stuff. One of the things that I know some people are not going to like is this. I like the tracking, but there are a lot of, tick boxes. There's a lot of do all these things. And in fact, you can see them here. This is the first time I've looked through them. And they're all, rewarding blood orbs and so on and so forth. So they're optional to the extent that what they're actually doing is they're just going to be rewarding you with currency. But if you look at the numbers, it's like, I've killed 2 out of 25 Sato Elites. I've killed 77 out of 250 Nosoi, whatever they are. 1 out of 4 Lamias, and so on and so forth. It's like, okay, if it's stuff that I'm going to be doing anyway, it's super cool that I'm being rewarded for it. The problem is that I'm skipping so many enemies because the combat isn't very exciting. You know, some of these objectives are super cool, and I love that it tracks them. You know, successfully inflict damage with Laconian Revenge counterattack. That's hold R1 and then parry, and it gives you an auto counter. There's some super cool options, but actually using them in combat against multiple enemies doesn't feel great because you're constantly getting knocked out of everything that you're doing. And you're just taking little bits of chip damage constantly. So, I've got to a stage where the game is giving me more and more stuff to do in combats. But realistically, the only things that have actually felt like they've made a real difference so far is finding the sacred monuments and the olive trees for Apollo. Apollo is the one that upgrades your spear, the majority of which is going to be, you know, spear-related combat. There've also been ones for Dionysius, which have upgraded our... Oh, there's one of them, in fact. They've upgraded our health bar and our healing flask. Now we've got it unlocked. The other ones have upgraded essentially our god powers, which are the gifts of Olympus. So you can see all of the different things that we've got unlocked for each of those and how to use them. But they're all, as you can tell, limited by our magic meter. You know, magic costs 80. Well, I've only got 75 magic, so I don't even know if I can use that. So, I'm really torn because on paper, so much of this is cool God of War stuff that I know I like from God of War and God of War Ragnarok. You know, I like the different spear tips. I like the different bits of the weapon that you can upgrade. I loved all of that in the 3D recent God of War games. And yet, it's not working for me in this. Not because those systems are any worse in this, but because the combat just doesn't feel very good. So, yeah, I wanted to put this out because it's going to be a while before I get the rest of my playthrough up for YouTube, because I'm playing the game. I am just not enjoying it as much as I want to be. It's doing so many things well, but the core of God of War for me is combat, and the combat in this just doesn't feel good. It feels okay, but okay combat is not what I go to God of War for. I either go to God of War old school for the power fantasy of ripping through things, or I go to the more modern God of War for a little bit more of a grounded take with a little bit of Soulsy style stuff thrown in, whereas this doesn't work for either of those. This doesn't feel Soulsvania in any way, shape or form, but it doesn't feel like a nice, fluid action RPG either. And that is problematic. And I know I'm not showing any of this. I'm trying to record this quickly because I've got to go and do some stuff. But it's just not doing it for me. And thus I am finding myself skipping combat a lot. And if you are advertising yourself as a combat-focused Metroidvania, or especially a God of War game, realistically you want your combat to be good. So yeah, if you've played Katama this year, I think the combat in this is very much going to disappoint you. It just doesn't feel fluid or fun, and being constantly stagger-locked is not great. If you do like your combat-focused Metroidvanias and you haven't played Katama, I highly recommend it. It's in my S tier for a reason. This, however, is gonna struggle right now, where I am, which, as a reminder, 10 10.5 hours into the game. This isn't getting out of my seat here unless it starts doing something really interesting. It's just fine. It's got a lot of stuff that I really like, but the combat is bringing it so far down that it's actually ruining the positives from everything else. So there we go. Bit of an update on God of War Sons of Sparta. The IP is doing some heavy lifting. Essentially, this could be a game, a story about any two Spartan Greek kids. The fact that it's Kratos and Deimos has had absolutely zero impact on me whatsoever, save for a couple of little cutscene asides that we've had with adult Kratos and Calliope. It's not really. It's not really related enough to God of War proper, I think. And I think that's it's a tie-in, it's a spin-off, and I think some people will be hungry enough for God of War lore that, you know, seeing a story of childhood Kratos and Deimos and what their relationship was like. Don't get me wrong, you know, their relationship is great. I like the back and forth between them. The voice acting is good and so on and so forth. All of the story stuff is good, but it could have been any other two boys, as far as I can really tell so far this far in the game. So the IP will sell this game. It would sell on its own merits, but I think this being Kratos, this being God of War, will get it more sales than it otherwise would get. Thanks very much for watching. Anyway, that's been an update. More thoughts later on my actual playthrough. As far as I get with the game, I've already had a couple of moments where I thought, you know what, I might just put this down. I might put this on my DNF, my did not finish list. But then I ran into a one more upgrade and I dropped the difficulty down. A little bit like Possessors was much better when the enemies weren't so kind of spongy. This feels a bit more God of War than it does on the cadet difficulty setting. Not because cadet difficulty was difficult, just because combat was kind of dull. Have a great day, folks. Cheerio. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, why not click the like button and consider subscribing. Remember, you can ring the bell notification icon to get notified when new videos go live. And until next time, cheerio.